welcome to Leadership and Reinvention, the podcast for leaders on a journey filled with twists, turns, and new possibilities. I'm Marissa Prazen, and along with my co-host Mike Cloutier, in each episode we explore the moments that spark transformation, challenge perspectives, and redefine success. Whether you're making a career shift or looking to lead with impact, this is your space to rethink, pivot, and grow. Let's dive in. Hello and welcome to Leadership and Reinvention. It is my pleasure to introduce our guest today, Lindsay Housman. Hi, Lindsay. How are you?
Hi, I'm great. Thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure. I'm so excited to have you share your story with our audience. I had the pleasure of hearing about your story and then reaching out to you because I thought what you were doing is just so exciting and really fits in with our whole reinvention focus, which is, having this awesome career that started as a, consultant with KPMG, studying, of course, accounting and business. And then, now being the CEO of HETTAS, which is a company that is offering to the world performance running shoes for women. And I can't wait for you to share with our audience the details of that. So how about, if I could ask you to maybe tell us a little bit about your story and journey and, in about 5-10 minutes, and then we'll dive in with some questions.
Yeah, sure. I think reinvention's a good theme. I've definitely had multiple careers over my span in business, which, oh my gosh, I'm embarrassed to say it's probably like 30 years now, which started off with a CA, now CPA, but at the time it was a CA with KPMG and accounting, and then realized that the world of audit was not my calling, and moved into business consulting, still at KPMG. And from there, Enron happened, which really created a pivot point in my career to make a choice about what I wanted to do, because those big four firms could no longer consult and provide audit services for the same companies. So that was another pivot into industry, where I moved into FP&A, which is financial planning and analysis, for a ski resort company that owned about 11 resorts across North America, and worked with the operations team on financial planning and analysis, cash flow management, quarterly meetings with the head office. And then decided I wanted to do something different, and pivoted to marketing, where I spent 3 years working on lodging and lift ticket revenue and strategy, which was a data-based role in marketing, but it was fun being in a different department, looking at numbers from a different perspective. That led me eventually into my role in technology, where I spent the last 14 or 15 years. And it was during that time where I was consulting at a casual shoe company, that my husband and I started talking about what we wanted to do when our kids were older and had left the house, and put out this idea about starting a brand focused on women in sport, which we had both at that time worked for a number of purpose-led brands, and fundamentally believed that brands could do good in the world. And we thought we would do this sort of in 2030, not in 2021, but the timing, both of the realization around the way athletic footwear is developed, which I learned more about after some significant feet issues, as well as seeing the need for women-specific sports gear, and sports equipment, which I consider shoes part of, just all sort of coalesced around 2019, 2020, and I started HETTAS at that time. So it's definitely been a varied career across 3 or 4 different types of of work or departments as well as industries, and then now landing in an entrepreneurial role in an athletic shoe company.
And what an amazing journey that prepares you for a CEO role, especially one where, you're not only offering services, but you're manufacturing product, which is, adds another level of complexity, of course, versus someone like me who's, more in the consulting space where, it's me and away we go, or anyone who might be working with me, but it's so much easier than dealing with manufacturing and all the challenges that would come with that. But before we dive into that, I'd love for you to share with our audience the story around how HETTAS came to be, because one of the things that I've learned through our connection is that running shoes were always and have always been made for men, and that women just wear a smaller size. Now, I have to say, I was shocked when I learned that.
It is mind blowing because you think, wow, it's 2026. How is this the state of the athletic footwear industry? But if you think about the origins of the industry in the 70s, when Nike and Adidas and those larger now sort of legacy established brands, when they started, it was a predominantly male dominated space. And female participation in sport wasn't that high. And when the capital that needs to go into producing shoes, you have tons of equipment, lasts, which is the shape of the foot, and molds, which are metal pieces of equipment that you use to make the midsoles. It is a very capital intensive industry. And even as a new shoe brand starting out today, you have to make a decision in how you are going to build those shoes. Most brands wouldn't start with the luxury of saying, I'm going to produce both a female specific and a male specific shoe, as it's going to double all of your upfront costs. And so when you look at the patterning of how, I think the stat was even in the mid 80s, only 20% of runners were female. And you think of the cost of producing those shoes, it makes sense, from a logical, not necessarily a biological perspective, that you would create one version and then adjust it as best you could for the gender that has a lower participation rate. And what we've seen in the 90s, since that point in the mid 80s to today, is this explosion, particularly in the 2010s and 2020s, of women becoming 50% or more, at least in the running space. And the growth in women's sport and the attention that women's sport is getting, particularly in the 2020s, has really been explosive. That's a big shift for companies that have spent 50 years developing shoes a certain way. So it's not necessarily something that, when I look at it logically, I'm like, okay, I can kind of see how we got here. But what I don't see happening is the acknowledgement and the change in those brands to want to change the way that they're making shoes, because they're successful. Their marketing works. Women are buying their shoes. And like you said, most women, it's an education gap too. Most women don't realize that their anatomy, their biomechanics, their hormones, and their changes in the way the hormones affect their ligaments and tendons aren't considered when athletic footwear is being developed.
Well, the other aspect of it is when I order for myself, for example, it's like women's and I order the size. I'm assuming that they're made for women because I don't go to, where my husband buys and then say, oh, I'll just take that smaller men's shoe. But in fact, like what you're sharing is that's what we're getting.
Yeah, essentially, yes.
Even though we don't know, we think that, the other colors they must be a different shoe as well internally, and yet they're not. So
they're not. And we're starting to see some small changes. Puma is making some positive moves around. They declared, I think it was around the Puma Deviate Nitro Forward. They will make it off of a women's last. Adidas has come out with one rugby cleat. So there are starting to be some small movements, but redesigning your running shoe assortment is a huge endeavor when you look at the number of SKUs that are available, and then also doing testing from both genders' perspective is a huge investment in time, and adds complexity to the product calendar. I was speaking to a fellow that runs an independent shoe testing lab out of San Diego that is very well known in North America, and many of the brands use. And he said, men's shoes get tested at a ratio of 4-1 compared to women's shoes. So most of their testing that they are doing even today is 75% based on men's shoes, and that women's shoes are coming in at a much smaller percentage.
So when you started your own company and really set out to address this, what I believe, and I'm sure you can quantify even, is this huge market need for female specific shoes. I know, we talked about this whole research piece of it that you did and that you're actively involved in. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Like how did that form a big part of the journey in terms of the shoes that you produce?
The more I was learning about the development of female athletic footwear, and I know these companies, these larger companies, have huge research budgets. That research is not published. So, what I saw was not just a gap in footwear, but understanding what exactly does a woman's shoe need, and that information was not available. And so it was important to me to not just be saying we're going to make a women's shoe and we're going to use a women's last, which is the shape of the foot. But, as a woman in my mid 40s who has had a pregnancy and postpartum and perimenopause, and I know the myriad of way my body has changed, and I look at my husband whose body hasn't really changed that much, the fact that wasn't into consideration in making a shoe, and how it might need to change even during a menstrual cycle, as we're getting more information about the effects of estrogen on tendons and ligaments, was just sort of mind-blowing to me. And so we looked for a university to partner with because I felt it was really important to elevate the conversation around women's hormones and their life journey and and their anatomy, and how does that change athletic footwear needs from an injury prevention perspective and from a longevity perspective. As we're starting to enter into the first real the baby boomers is sort of that first generation of women who participated in sport. We're starting to see, and that we haven't had a large cohort of athletic women to study and to get data on going through that aging process. So we were fortunate through family friends to be introduced to Max Donnellan, who is the head of a brand new biomechanics lab out at Simon Fraser University, where Tech Labs, they just had their grand opening last month, but they've been in operation for a couple of years now. But the lab is now fully built, and he introduced us to Dr. Chris Napier, who runs all of our research through Simon Fraser's Run Lab, which is under the Wear Tech Lab umbrella. And so we started by doing just baseline research, literature review, what has been published, what information exists, focus groups. What do women care about? What is their experience? And then overlapping that to figure out what research do we want to do? Because the sad fact is that there is not a lot out there. The stat that's being widely cited now, if you follow women's sports research, is between 2014 and 2021, only 6% of studies published in major sports medicine journals were focused exclusively on women. And outside of that, only 34% of the participants in mixed gender studies were women. And so the data does not exist. And so what we were going off of initially was a lot of focus groups, a lot of baseline data around a lot anatomically women's bone structure and the way their feet are shaped, some, inferences or hypothesis around firmness of shoe, around how hormones affect ligaments. And this research was done in 2021, where it's still, it still is today. It is very challenging to bring women into studies and know how to capture hormonal data accurately. And this, is not unique to sports science. We're hearing about it in whether it's, drugs and pharmacy, or you're hearing about it in medical procedures and
So
just
many
the lack of
areas.
data, women's health. And it does blend into sport because it affects the way our bodies move and the way our hormones affect our bodies and what that means from what we need from a stability, from a firmness, from a shape and hold of the foot perspective to prevent injury, which will keep us being active longer and ultimately improve our performance.
What's so exciting about this is, as I'm listening to you, I'm reflecting on the fact that your personal story is one of reinvention, but what you're actually doing now is invention, because you're literally starting from scratch. There's so little out there. And you mentioned earlier partnerships. And when we talk to entrepreneurs, of course, by definition, we're alone, right? Entrepreneurs, we're on our own. We might have a small group of people around us, but we're trying to build something from nothing. And so could you elaborate a little bit more on, how you were able to start leveraging these partnerships, especially for our audience to think about, whatever space they might be in, how they can reach out and look at these other resources around them to help them kind of, build their business, as opposed to feeling so alone, like I've got to do it all myself.
Yeah. Is there a specific, like, there's so many different ways I can go with partnerships. When I think about, I've always taken the approach of like, let's look what's in my toolbox and let's look at what's missing. And what's missing, let's go find people that are much smarter than me that I can develop a trusting relationship with to support. And I think the first thing is being able to know that you need help. If you
Having that
don't
self-awareness.
see that you need help, you're not going, and if you're not, you need to be okay with the fact that you are really good at some things and you are not good at other things. And there are people that are going to be so much better than you at those other things. And that them coming in isn't a threat. It's a support. And so I think having that mindset of really knowing your strengths and seeing where the opportunity is to partner with people who are best in their field, or that is their strength, is the first step. Knowing, what my background is, very operational, it's very financial. I'm not what I would call a traditional creative. I think creativity exists in all places. I can be creative in a IT system design, but I can't, looking at making a photo shoot, coming up with campaign ideas. Those are things that are not my forte. I can run a calendar. I can run the calendar of the production, but I'm not going to be able to come up with product design. And so filling in, I knew I needed help with creative and branding. I knew I needed help with marketing. And even though I spent time in a marketing organization, it was very data driven. It wasn't about who is the customer? How do we reach that customer? What type of marketing do we need to do to support this? I have no idea. And so was really fortunate. We had an agency that we knew from, my husband and I knew through previous career, that wanted to help us. We found a woman who's now our marketing advisor. And it takes time to build trust, like the agency we had an established relationship with, we went in with trust. The marketing advisor, we worked through several contracts to build that trust. on like 3 to 4 month contracts to then bring her on as a full-time marketing advisor. We knew we needed help with product. And so we have a founding product partner that came in at an equity level that has over 40 years experience in the athletic footwear industry. And so finding science, we wanted to do public research. So, again, it was serendipitous, but I also do believe when you put things out there around what you're looking for and you're open to it, the serendipity that can happen um, is incredible.
And so really leveraging, I'm hearing, leveraging not only the relationships and the trust maybe from past lives, but really looking at, who else is in my network and how can I reach
Yeah.
out to them and secure that. What about something that, many of the entrepreneurs we speak to struggle with as their business starts to scale and grow is, of course, capital, securing capital. And
So hard.
and as much as I hate that this is true, and I don't have the statistics at my fingertips, but women in general have a harder time securing capital. Like we just have to, unfortunately, prove ourselves time and time again before we can really, get the capital that we need. I'm curious about, given your own journey, what advice would you give others who are going through that in terms of how to potentially approach that? What are some of the things that, if you had to go back and do it again, that you might do differently or think about differently?
The stats are true, and it's hard. And when you first experience it, you're gonna feel like you just want to quit, and because you're like, oh, what do you mean? It's the stat around venture capital, and I think for entrepreneurs first is
Exactly.
understanding what type of capital fits your business. So there are lots of different types of capital out there, of which venture is one
Hmm.
piece. But there's capital through family offices. There's capital through friends and family. In the US, less so in Canada, there are amazing programs for CPG founders for microloans and capital that can be based on your inventory or revenue stream.
Okay.
In Canada, there's Shopify Capital, which if you start using, and it does have they do have a price tag against
Mm.
it, but it is an easy source of capital that I have used repeatedly. And the more you use it, the more they'll give you.
Mm.
And it does float. There are small business loans. You need to understand, your capacity for risk, and your capacity for growth. Because if you do secure venture money, that comes with a certain set of expectations around growth and exit. If you get a small business loan, they're going to want you to personally guarantee it, which I don't necessarily agree with as something that should be offered to founders because it just creates a whole other layer of stress. But that's the way it is today. And there's grants. Again, the grants in the US are much more extensive than the grants available in Canada. There are a number of grants that are available cross-border. So I think the first thing to do is make a list of all the types of capital and then understand what what it is that and sort of where the barriers are, so that you're going to get a lot of no's, particularly if you're going with venture and the family office, and that's where the larger checks come from. So you're likely going to need to do that, and knowing sort of the statistics against it, it takes a large amount of resilience and a large amount of willingness to put yourself out there and be rejected. To do that type of thing. You need to also understand: are you willing to do pitch competitions? They take a lot of time. They can be great for exposure and for marketing. Yeah, but you need to be comfortable doing that. And if you are wanting to do that, working with someone to help you, like at school class, to train how to do that pitch competition. And crowdfunding, which is less common in Canada, which we just ran a crowdfunding campaign, more common in the US. So I think it's understanding what types of capital are out there, what are the pros and cons of each one, understanding as a female founder that less than 2% of venture capital does go to women. I think it is up to 30%, like 28% if you have a male co-founder. So one of the things I did was start bringing my husband into calls purely because he's a man.
Um,
Um, and
I
most of
mean,
the people
really
that you
kind of your husband, but the fact that we have to do that is just really, really frustrating.
mind blowing. I mean, I imagine it's what it was
Yeah.
like when women needed their husband to co-sign a car loan or a mortgage. Like it's, you
On a
kind of
bank
feel
account.
embarrassed. Like it just doesn't count. I think, and you see this with angels, which I forgot to mention, which I'd put under that
Angel
family office, sort
investors,
of
yeah.
angel. You see it with angel money too, and there's no stats around this one, but men invest as angels on a much higher rate and percentage than women. And there's a lot of work being done on this to understand that more so today, that women have been um, in the family, when you look at divvying up the roles, men historically have taken on that more financial investment role, and where there has been capital, women have taken the philanthropic arm. And so women have also been trained more so around perfection, where men have been trained more so around capacity for risk. And so what you see happening with companies founded by men that are typically for male products is they call their buddies, and their buddies will write those $50,000, $100,000 checks, or they find someone through an angel network who will do that, and whether you call it hobby investing, and they are able to raise that money to get to the pre-seed seed stage because they understand the problem, they understand the product, and they feel a relationship to the founder. Women pitching to men face a barrier around, and it's an unconscious bias. If it's double barrier if you're pitching a female specific product, because now not only are you having to build this relationship and this trust, but now you're also pitching a product that they don't necessarily understand, and don't necessarily, like women don't necessarily understand that they're buying shoes that are made for men and what that means. And men are just like, why is this a problem? And so that angel arena, as well as what really helps fund these early stage companies, is very small for women, and it's very difficult to get checks. And so it makes fundraising really hard and adds a ton of financial pressure. That there's a couple startups right now. One is a male founded volleyball company, two ex Nike dads whose daughters play volleyball, and their ability to raise capital. And there's another running shoe startup out of Texas called Veloci. Their ability to raise capital as male founders in solving a problem that men will understand has been like, they can get the larger checks. Whereas, I've been fortunate to have a series of multiple $100,000 checks, but you're always just waiting for that next check, because,
Yeah,
$200,000 or $300,000 only goes so far when you're building and scaling a business.
for sure. And like you said, when you can really tap into that network, and on top of that, you've got, the business to run, and what you've just described sounds like a full-time job in and of itself, let alone running the business, scaling the business, and everything else. And then you're running into these hurdles. Now, having said that, of course, we understand,
Yeah.
male driven founded business also run into challenges, and it's not like it's a
100%.
cakewalk to just get this
No.
money, but certainly there's just data, and you just quoted the statistic, which is less than 2% of female founded businesses are able to successfully secure the funding. That's a big deal. That makes a really, really big difference. When you think about your journey and all the lots of good things too. But of course, a lot of our, fellow entrepreneurs and people listening, love hearing about how all of us have navigated our respective challenges. What do you think, or when you think back on these, what are two or three things that you're like, I just wish I'd done this differently? When I think back on my journey and starting in really a different, like I said, a different area with respect to a manufacturing, based organization, which to me is just awe of that, because I know that there's so much more complexity than starting something like, let's say, a consulting practice, which doesn't require that kind of complexity.
Um, Two or three things I would have done differently. I think, we did think we had two investors when we started that both fell through. And then my husband and I were able to fund part of the business. And then we did a friends and family round. And it was a case of that network where it was a male family friend that then called three of his friends, and they all wrote decent sized checks. And we thought, oh, this isn't going to be that hard. And, like, oh, okay, this money will get us to launch, then we'll raise another round. And it just seemed very logical. And I think there were a couple decisions that I made with that first pool of money that I would have made different decisions now, knowing how hard it was to then 18 months later, we did the Friends and Family Room April 2022. And then we raised about just $500,000 to fund shoe development, website, marketing, brand creation. That gave us a runway of 18 months. And then we went to launch the shoe and planned on doing another round. And I still had money left over from that round, but not extensive. And we couldn't raise the second round. And so we needed I think we raised $100,000. And now we're launching a shoe, and we've got to go into cash conservation mode and really find other ways of funding. I think when money comes easy, whether it's $500,000 or $3 million, there's an assumption that it's going to continue to be that way. And that's not necessarily true. So I think being ultra conservative with that first cash in and being very pragmatic and slightly pessimistic about the next raise, I would have made some different decisions in the allocation of those funds. I think as well, when you have limited money, there's a lot of gifts around that, and you have to get really creative. So I think a lot of good things came out of that situation. But that's definitely something I would have done differently early on. I think with regards to marketing, coming from bigger companies and thinking about launching a brand, there were some ideas that maybe were too big for what we actually needed to launch HETTAS. And so I probably would have gone back and looked at those few initial contracts and made some different decisions around the marketing support, which we did the next 2 years and became much more scrappy about it. But, I look back and go, oh, well, that would have saved me X here, and that would have saved me Y there. I think those are really important. With the product design, we spent a ton of time working with Simon Fraser University, working with the researcher, and working with our product team, and working with runners. So we had a lot of runners trying the shoes. We did a lot of different staged wear tests and a longer run study. What we didn't do was invite the retailers in who would be selling the shoe to give us their feedback. And I think I would have brought on we had one retailer that we still work closely with that was part of that process, but I would have done a wider test of off the shelf testing the product again in the store versus handing out the shoes to runners. And we did a really thorough surveying. We got lots of data, but we didn't get enough from the retailer perspective.
Right. Who are, of course, key to your success, right? They're a big part part of that. What about from a leadership perspective? When you consider some of the as an entrepreneur and a CEO and a business leader, just that resilience that's required, as you said, to kind of pivot, navigate, take that deep breath and go
I mean, it takes
every
a while to build. I don't think you can do,
day.
I don't know that there's anything that I could have done differently. Like I didn't quit, but I wanted to lots of times.
And what
I mean,
did keep you? Actually, that's important, Lindsay. Like what kept you from quitting?
I don't know. I fundamentally, like the number of tears I shed in those first 2 years, probably, I think you do build resilience to that and realize that it'll pass and something good will happen. And you just
Yeah.
need to keep putting one foot in front of the other. I think it's, my just getting the customer feedback, speaking to athletes, just knowing that we were doing the right thing. Like this is a
Mhm.
product that needs to exist, and we were doing something that was making a difference in people's lives, whether it was an everyday runner or walker or an elite athlete. Every time I would have a bad day, my husband would be like, call an athlete, remember why you're doing it,
Yeah.
and,
That
we also did
purpose,
it.
right?
It's the
Mission.
purpose. You just, we were really clear on our mission early on, and having our mission pillars be really clear, I think really gives you that guiding light. And having my daughters, um, telling me you don't give up, mom. Like you got to keep going. Like when your kids tell you that, they're watching and they're taking the lessons from this. You keep going. Like, we've got kids now that don't see barriers. They just think that if they wanted to start a shoe company, that my mom did it and I could go do it too, And I think at the end of the day, the greatest gift of this company could be that women don't see the barrier to doing something. They see it as the opportunity. Yeah, but I don't know I would do anything different from that leadership perspective, except tell that person it's okay. It's going to be okay. Even today, I got to remind
You got
myself,
it.
like, Lindsay 4 months from now is going to tell me that it's going to be okay. And really thinking about, trying. I got home last night after a 3-hour drive home from Whistler, which was not fun. And it was dark, and I got bad news about something going on with production. And
No.
I just wanted to throw things. And you just have to, like, be able, and I, you just have to be able to, like, calm yourself down and know that this is all going to work out. And so it's not saying that you're not going to keep having those reactions, but it's that the time it takes to recover from that, I think, gets faster because now I've had to endure so many of them, and I'm still here, and the company's still here. So it's like, okay, this is like when that happened in 2022, and okay, so we're just gonna keep going. Yeah.
Well, and this is interesting too, because it makes me think of something that I speak to, and of course, as you know, I'm an executive coach, and I speak to a lot of leaders who, the whole discussion around control and what's within my control comes up a lot.
A
And
lot.
you just described something, hit the nail on the head, which is there's this stuff going. I mean, you're not there in production, but there's stuff that's impacting your business that needs to be addressed. And how do we sort of navigate these areas where we don't have direct control? We might have influence, but they're critical to our business.
And you just have to be able to take, I mean, you're gonna, like last night we found out our production got delayed. I have no inventory right now. We were expecting the product to land at the end of November, and now it's gonna arrive at the end of February, and now it's gonna arrive at the end of March. Which might be like, oh, that's only a month. What's the big deal? Well, my investors are tracking my revenues. So now that's going to be another month and a half without full inventory to sell. My year ends in
Absolutely.
October. So now my sales cycle is shortened. And And does that mean that, my lead investor isn't going to want to invest next year? Maybe. Okay, well, that's a big, and so and you have to just sort of, you're going to be upset. So be upset and just sort of like, don't throw things, but you might want to. But like, just sort of, figure out what is your way to recenter yourself? Like for me, it was at this point, it was like 9 o'clock at night. And in Asia, that's the beginning of the day on a Monday. And so that's why when you're working with countries that work on opposite time schedules, you're going to get information when you shouldn't think that you need to be online thinking about work. And it's like, okay, I just need to, digest this. And I need to go read my book, and I need to try and like just calm myself down. So I need to sleep so I can function today.
Okay.
And then, I'll do a quick brainstorm like, okay, well, what are things that we can do to turn this into uh, a different situation? While we had preemptively put um, pre-orders into our new website design. Okay, when's the new website design going live? Okay, we could turn pre-orders on at the end of February. Not the perfect situation, but it's testing out something new. So you got to get creative and be like, okay, well, what can I control? Okay, oh, we got this functionality. Okay, I can do that. What else can I control? I can control my budget. Okay, what costs can I defer to make sure it's landing to match when the inventory lands, so that I know that I'm lining up my marketing spend with when I'm going to have shoes. So you really just have to go into that. I can't control, and the reason that production was delayed is a very good reason. And it's something that I wouldn't want to rush. So it's like,
Mhm.
okay, I'm not, anger's not going to get me anywhere. So let me have my moment, because you're going to have those natural emotions and you can't beat yourself up about it. And then what can I put into action that will make me feel like I'm able to shift some things?
Absolutely. No, and I mean, you've just said it beautifully, which is, what can I control and focus on those and think about the different scenarios, and that's all we can do. But I think, from a leadership perspective and from a CEO perspective, I think these are the things that we need to remind ourselves about, because it's not easy, right? Things go off the rails and we're like, oh no, and you're trying to keep up with everything that's going, knowing very well that the next day is going to bring another new surprise. But it's
Yeah.
agility, that ability to pivot, stay, control what I can control, and I mean, it's the best way forward. I wanted to highlight that because I think when we hear about entrepreneurs and everybody running their businesses, there's an assumption that, things are going smoothly, that everything, but the reality is we're
It's
all,
not.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And it doesn't matter what stage you're at. I mean, I know founders in multiple different stages of companies. My husband's the CEO of, multi-million dollar company. It's never smooth. And it's, people, I think sometimes, I love Taylor Swift. She had a quote that she was saying, I forget who she was quoting, but everybody's jealous of the outcome, but people aren't jealous of the journey to get there and all the work. And there's a reason, it's when you choose to be an entrepreneur, you're putting yourself in a high risk situation. You're putting yourself on, I don't think I understood the emotional roller coaster that goes along with it. So, your mental health, which can then affect your physical health. There are so many pieces of it, and people could look at it and be like, think, oh, Lindsay started a shoe company, and it's like, well, it is, I choose to do this hard thing every day. And one of our investors and business advisors said to me, you choose your hard. For some people, going in and working a 9 to 5 job is the hard that they choose. There's going to be things that are up and down and difficult about it. Nothing that
Absolutely.
anyone is choosing is easy.
Yeah.
And so even what people might see magazine articles or LinkedIn, which I think can make things look way better than they are, and not really understand the roller coaster, and the stress that goes along with it, in the background. But at the end of the day, you choose it. You wake up in the morning and you're like, okay, I'm choosing to do this hard thing again today.
Absolutely. And to that point, as a leader, one of the things we always talk about is how to maintain that balance, right? I mean, of course, there's days when it's just full on, and then there's days where hopefully you can catch a breath. Are there any, specific strategies that you would share with our listeners in terms of, how do you kind of re-energize that battery? How do you stay on top, given, the roller coaster ride that we're all on?
Yeah. Everybody has different things. I think it's understanding what helps reset you, and being able to be true to that. And some people are early morning risers, and I read all this stuff about the benefits. And I am not an early morning riser. I am not getting up at
I'm
5
with
a.m. and
you.
doing it. And so,
Not in
but then
that
you start to
boat.
think about, maybe you're like, maybe I should be. And I think as soon as you start going should, that's not what works for you. What actually works really well for me is exercising at 4:30 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, or 5:30. Somewhere in that. And I've been that way since university. It's not going to change, or even high school. And my kids are older now, so I can do that. And when they were younger, that was a more difficult time, but it was never going to be 7 a.m. because that just would have created more stress for me. So, I work out of my house a lot. I work by myself. I love to play tennis. Right now I'm injured and I can't, which is really hard for me because I'll block a few lunches a week to go play tennis. And some people might see me at Jericho and be like, oh, Lindsay's playing tennis again at lunch. But what they don't see is that I was on a call with Asia from 8:30 to 10 o'clock last night in my garage after a 3-hour drive that nearly wiped me out emotionally. And they don't know that I flex my schedule, because for me, working flexibly is more important, and getting that tennis game in, whether it's singles or doubles, where I can have a run at lunch, I can see some people, I can have some social time. Yeah, okay, I might be online, between up to 8 o'clock at night, but I have a hard stop. Like at some point, the computer goes off, and it's like sleep is so important to me, and sort of that nighttime routine to make sure that I'm getting good sleep is so important. I think you just need to know what works for you to recharge that battery, and not listen to other people's opinions of what they might think of that.
The rituals that work for you. And I love what you shared in that it's being authentic to you, because as you said, you hear or read about all these different, ways to improve and rebalance and recharge your energy. But if it's not authentic to you, then that in and of itself is a resistance that you're fighting.
Yeah, and you know what? My goal for this year is really sort of reducing that sort of mental things that take up mental space that don't need to.
Yeah.
And I think we don't realize sometimes how much we're carrying that's taking up mental space, that if we can let that go, it just creates, more places for the things where you want to put your energy. So like 2026, I'm trying to be conscious about what is taking up my mental energy, and is that worth it? Because I think I used my mental energy in the last 2 years on a lot of things that I didn't necessarily need to. And it creates a freneticness because you're
Yeah.
juggling so many things in your head.
And that's another great reflection that you just shared, which is actually looking back and sort of thinking what is, just doesn't serve me anymore. And as an entrepreneur, shifting and
Hmm.
saying these are the things either I've learned that I don't want to do or invest time in anymore, or conversely, I should do more of this because it does serve me well and I should put more energy into that.
Yeah.
Um, as as we approach the end of our discussion, which has really been fascinating, thank you so much. We always like to ask our guests, is there anything that we didn't, or in this case, me, because Mike unfortunately couldn't join us today, but of course sends his regards. And but is there anything that you'd like to share with the or with our audience, maybe that I didn't ask about that you think would be really important?
Nothing that comes to mind.
That's okay. That's good too. That's good too. Well, it's really been a pleasure. Thank you so much for, so many of the key insights and learnings and just authenticity around what went well and what didn't. I think everyone is eager to hear the real stories, and you shared that with us today, which is huge. Thank you so much.
Oh, well, thank you.
I hope you have a great rest of the day, and that maybe there's a surprise on that manufacturing side, and that you get stuff earlier than you're expecting. That can happen too.
It can happen too. Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Well, thank you to our audience for joining us on Leadership and Reinvention, and we look forward to seeing you again next time. Take care, and thank you, Lindsay.